people are trying to get their heads around what's happening. And out of nowhere, the Shuyukh suggested we talk about colonialism. Now, what has that got to do with anything? Or perhaps what's going on right now has everything to do with that? Well, let's find out. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Battle of Narratives, where we discuss a narrative that is very different to what the mainstream media has to offer. Today we have Sheikh Kazim and Sayyid Ali. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. And assalamu alaikum to the live audience, the brothers who've come. So let's get right to the point. Brothers, Shuyukh, why on earth are we staying here in the middle of the war talking about colonialism when there might be more pressing issues?
I think the current war has given us the opportunity to really think about a lot of things about how the world works. And otherwise it would have been difficult to speak about a lot of things. So even in the previous episodes, the discussions that were brought up, I think it's the current setting where people are interested. It's something that is, war is heavy, so people are concerned. And I think that's what we are trying to do. We're trying to understand the world around us in a better way. Of course, so that we can make informed decisions in our surroundings. And we know for a fact that the world that we live in today is not something that came into existence out of nowhere. And never it happens that a society or world is formed in a short period of time. So we have no choice in order to understand how these structures function. Why do you have a US-led Western hegemony trying to dominate everyone, and they have imposed this war on Iran? Although we have the so-called ceasefire, but it's still ongoing. To understand that, we need to understand the world and the structures that dominate it. And in order to do that, we have to see the history of where all these things, these structures have come from.
So basically, current events are not happening in a vacuum. The history has a big impact on what's going on right now.
Yeah. And at a social scale, it's like you need to look at even like a longer history. And as they say, even to understand an individual, you have to do background check. And what does background check mean? You look at their history, you look at their family, their youth, how they've spent, okay? At a social scale, it just becomes slightly larger. So we'll have to look at like last 300 years, so not a very long period, to understand what's happening today. And that 300-year period is the rise of the modern world, which started with this thing called colonialism. So,
okay, so it's a bit reassuring you said 300 years, because I was going to ask, are we going back to the Roman Empire? How far back are we going?
We want to, but we're just saying, let's start with 300 for now, and then we'll figure out how far back we need to go to trace roots of some of the things that are happening today. Yes.
Sayyid Ali, you're very passionate about this topic. What's your take on it?
Assalamu alaikum. Passionate, yes, but because of how pressing it is. Just as Sheikh mentioned, and you mentioned that wars, they don't happen in vacuums. I mean, in this current war that we are in the midst of, the Palestine issue, for example, if it were not for the colonial project, we wouldn't be in this war. It's born out of the colonial project and the Sykes-Picot Agreement, to be precise, in the World War I, in the midst of World War I, and which the Middle East, which is basically West Asia. I mean, this term Middle East is pejorative. We should not be using it. This area was
carved. What do you use instead?
West Asia.
West Asia.
Because when we say Middle East, I mean, who's middle? Because the Westerners, they had divided the East into Near East, Far East, and Middle East. It's relative to them, near and far middle. We are not middle to ourselves. So we're West Asia.
It's a very white supremacist kind of thing, that we are center of the world and you judge everyone relative to us. So we are center of the earth. So a more natural way is you have continents, and in continents you have directions. So you have Asia and you have West Asia, which is us. You have East Asia, which is Vietnam and other countries. So that's a more natural way of saying it. Yeah.
So why can't we start the history from, let's say, the revolution, or maybe a bit before that, World War I, World War II? Why do we need to go back so far behind?
See, the modern project, or the modern world as we refer to it, it's very unique. In the sense that we used to have empires. You had the Roman Empire, you had the Persian empires, you had Muslims having empires. But when we study the post-Renaissance project of colonization, it's very distinct, it's very different in many ways. And here I would like to cite the example of Iran to further clarify this difference. See, the Persians and Iran's relationship with Islam supposedly Islam was an Arab affair. Arabs were the first Muslims. But then they came and they conquered Iran. But Iranians probably have influenced Islam more than the Arabs themselves. Some of the greatest scholars, greatest thinkers, jurists,
from
poets,
the early days as
from
well.
the early days,
Yeah.
right from the early days, not now, from the early days. And this is cross-sectarian, Shia or Sunni. Persians, they've influenced Islam. So, but can we even imagine such a thing in the modern world? It's impossible.
In fact, what's really interesting is that today a lot of the non-Shias would be very strongly inclined towards the Arabs, whereas in the past, in the early days of Ahl Sunnah, a lot of their senior scholars were Iranians
if you
themselves.
see how Sitta, the authors, they are apparently, if I am not mistaken, out of 6, 5 are Iranians, Persians,
yeah.
Persian origin.
Even before Sunni Imams of fiqh, only Imam Malik is from the Arabian Peninsula. So this new colonialism, modern colonialism, it was based on certain principles. First of all, it was that white man's burden, that we are the civilized ones, we have reached the high summit of humanity, and now we have a project to civilize others. They can never be us, but they can be like us, our inferior versions, and they have to aspire to that. So we have this civilization mission. But that is based on a very strict settler colonial relationship. And one part has to exist for the benefit of the other part. For example, the periphery has to exist for the benefit of the core. So you exist only to benefit the colonizer. This is second. And third, you also have the concept of chattel slavery. And fourth, reinventing the identities of these people so that they started looking at themselves from your prism of understanding. So this created an imbalance in which only one idea of humanity and a skewed idea of humanity, which was essentially racist. Other empires, they were not really racist. Yes, people used to come and plunder. The Mongols, they plundered a lot of places. But in most places where they came, they settled down, they assimilated the people, and they were dissolved. But what colonialists did, that they tried to reinvent people. They started telling people who you are. And they wrote people's own histories. So the history of Africa, the history of India, whole identities were reinvented. And this is, I think, one of the most insidiously violent things that colonialism has done. So it's very different. Yes, we have had empires, we have had loot and plunder, we have had expansions, but modern colonialism, it's distinct in many ways, in its systemic nature, in its racial nature, and in its colonial settler relationship in which one area exists for the benefit of the other, and this is reinvented, even intellectually and epistemically, as an inferior version of the colonialists.
Okay, can someone not say that you're still dwelling in the past? Can we not put colonial history behind? Because look, all the countries have now got their independence. The colonial powers have repented for the slavery. They've changed their constitution. They have amendments, and they have all of these things to make up for the past, right? Now what we have today are new powers. Iran, let's say, even if Iran was affected before, now it's had a revolution and it's left that part. So this is history now. It's history that's now irrelevant. Why do we still want to hold on to the mistakes of people in the past and blame the people today for what others did in the past?
So I think if modernity and Western civilization as a project would have ended with these freedom movements that happened in the second half of 20th century, you could say it's something of the past. Like right now we don't speak of the Greek civilization or the Roman civilization because it doesn't have a direct impact. But I think what happened is that, yes, in most parts of the world, people gained political independence in the sense that their direct colonial control ended. But if you go in the deeper layers of how a society functions, so for example, knowledge, what kind of knowledge people access, or you go even deeper into values of a society, or you go into even deeper like worldview and perspectives. So if you see, even though these freedom movements are very significant, like so India was attained freedom 1947, similar Pakistan with all the details and all the countries, a lot of these structures and values and knowledge and everything, it stayed. So in fact, there's a famous statement, I don't recall who, but he's like studying India after independence. There's a famous person who commented saying that what I see is that the white masters have been replaced by brown masters. So it's literally the same structures, even politically. So yes, the British Empire kind of ended, but the political system and the attitudes and the goals and the values, they kind of stayed. And that's why it's a well-studied phenomenon, they call it neocolonialism. So colonialism in one form ended, but the same thing continued in other ways, and in sometimes more complex ways. Because colonialism is about dominating others. If you see the definition of colonialism. And now this domination can go very deep, as Syed mentioned, that it became so bad that it went to dominating other people's identities, their even perception of their own self-worth, who they are. And even so it's very interesting, as you mentioned, that there's a statement from Shaheed Imam Khamenei that he said that one of the things that the colonialists did to Africa was that it told them, you have no history. And that's very scary, right? When you tell a whole nation that you're like tribal people, you had no civilization, no history. And then he gives a few examples of very elaborate, sophisticated civilizations in Africa. But the colonialists came and they told them that you have to believe us, that you have no history, you have no past, you have nothing to go back to and glorify and feel connected.
Basically, that's a way to make a people feel weak and dependent on you, basically.
And then now the only frame of reference you have is you have to see the West as your ideal, and you have to somehow catch up with them, knowing that you'll never be able to catch up. So basically, you have to agree to a position of being a subordinate, a well-behaved, good subordinate that's periphery, and that will get some benefit. But you are disposable. If the time comes, they will. And again, I think we're discussing all this to project it onto what's going on right now. So all these Arab countries that so heavily invested in getting closer to the United States and even Israel's Abraham Accords and everything, is the same idea that you are secondary, you'll get some benefit, you'll get some very nice, beautiful buildings, but when the day comes, you're disposable. So that's what happened, right? There are news reports saying that some of these countries, they asked United States to help them protect their assets. So they're told that, sorry, our priority is Israel. You come next. If we have some more extra left, we might give you. So that idea of domination and it's very interesting that it's been 70, 80 years after those independent movements and everything. And these colonial ideas are running the world. It's not something that's in the books. Yet, most people don't see it. That's the surprising part, that it's so relevant. And as you said, that the reason why he was interested in the topic is because of relevance. Same thing for me, that it's actually literally ruling the world today. But it's a bit complex, so it's hard to see. And people think that we have truly achieved independence and freedom. And in fact, that's what the Islamic Republic is fighting for. They're saying that, look, we don't want this kind of a global order. We disagree in worldview, we disagree in values, we disagree in knowledge and sources of knowledge, disagree in everything, basically. We disagree in a lot of things. So I think it's very relevant, and we can project all those into today's thing. And examples are many. Just to add just one more is that, for example, a lot of these West African countries, the Sahel nations, if I'm not mistaken, 7 or 8 of them, their currency is pegged to the French currency. Yeah. And they have to deposit a part of their GDP, huge amounts of money, in French national banks. Again, it's a very strong way of controlling these 6, 7 countries. Basically, France literally has their financial system in its hands. Petrodollar, same thing. They have so many things. So there's many ways in which power is exercised today, which is just a continuation of the colonial structures that were formed as the modern world and the new things that started with Renaissance came and they increased.
I guess we think of colonialism as something that was really far, long time ago, but actually when we're talking about less than 100 years since some of these countries have had their independence, right? And at a social scale, that's nothing. As in apparent independence, but as a social scale, 100 years is nothing, right?
And what's interesting is, at least I feel, is that our understanding of colonialism is also shaped by colonialists, because they have written the history books that teach us the history of colonialism in a certain way, probably with the intention that, yes, colonialism was bad, it was evil, but it's done now. Why do you want to go back? So even our understanding of what colonialism is is shaped by them. And it's a
think-
distorted understanding of what colonialism was
I
and
think
how
for
it
many
continues
people,
today.
colonialism is shaped by Pirates of the Caribbean and how the
Now that you've mentioned pirates, I mean, and this is why it's important. See, from the supposed age of discovery to today, what's really different? You had pirates back then, now you have USA as a pirate empire, blockading countries, looting ships. So this is very important to understand that colonialism is not a relic of the past. What we see today, it is quintessentially a legacy of colonialism. It's changed form. You call it imperialism, you call it neo-colonialism, you call it hegemony. At some places it's more insidious. At some places it's more upfront. But it's always there. We are inundated in it. Our political systems, as Sheikh also mentioned, our economic systems, our education systems. I mean, right when someone is born, for example, today, one of the first things we do after naming the person is a child. We register them as a citizen of the state. We didn't always have this. This idea of the modern bureaucratic state, it was alien.
But isn't
to
that
us.
a good thing? Hasn't this brought a lot of benefits in the
See,
current
all
system?
the problems we have, the identity politics, ethnic wars, border disputes, all these arbitrarily drawn artificial borders, linguistic issues, they're all born out of this modern concept of state. We can
So the Western world has brought some law and order in the East. Why can't we see it like this? Why do we have to focus on, look, every system at the end of the day, when you go and you conquer somewhere, there is, like you said, looting, there's killing, there's so on. There are negative aspects, but there are also a lot of positive aspects, right? The West has brought a lot of technology, science, education, law and order, systemizing things, bureaucracy. Okay, we're using the word bureaucracy sounds negative, but it's systemizing things, right? So if the West has helped the East in a particular way, why can't we see it from a positive light?
see this whole idea of a benevolent empire. It is very self-defeating. Empires, essentially, they were never benevolent, first of all. Secondly, they never meant to be benevolent. In fact, it was theorized. I mean, some of the stalwarts of liberalism, like Alexis de Tocqueville, John Stuart Mill, they actually believed that despotism, dictatorship, this is the legitimate form of dealing with so-called barbarians, because they used to refer to
Everyone
the rest
else is a
as
barbarian.
barbarians. They were all barbarians who need to be civilized in order to be controlled, to the extent that they can be controlled. So first of all, empires were never really benevolent. Secondly, and there's a very interesting book by Walter Rodney, and he was teaching at the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania when he wrote this book in the 70s, how Europe underdeveloped Africa. This is the title of the book. And he says, when we talk about development, it's not just the process of something being made. Let's take an example, for example. I take this table and I make this chair, for example, out of the wood that I get from this table. The process of development is not only that chair that is being made. The process of development also involves the destruction of this table in the first place. All of this is one process. So when you look at what the Westerners have done, what the Europeans have done in Africa, in India, in East Asia, for example, we also have to look at what they destroyed first. The whole of this process taken together will give us the answer of what was lost and what was gained. Yes, you got railways, for example, but first of all, the railways were not from you. It was for the reason that all the loot that was being plundered had to be taken out from the territories in an efficient manner. So yes, they left behind some artifacts of colonialism, but at what cost? That cost is very important. India, for example, it had the world's 20 or 25% GDP. I don't exactly remember the statistics. Before the British came, 1/4 of the global GDP was contributed by India. When they left, it was somewhere close to 2 or 3%.
3%, yeah.
Okay, so can we not attribute
this very idea is wrong, for example, that they did something and left behind things they civilized. These very terms, and this is why it's very important to understand that more problematic. See, and we can also, let's discuss also the difference between colonialism, hegemony, and imperialism, for example,
we'll
over there.
Yeah.
It's not always, you don't colonize people only when you plant a flag in their territory. The colonization of the minds, as Sheikh also alluded to it, is worse. That is more problematic. What does it mean to be civilized? What does it mean to be backward or forward or progressed or developed? What does it mean to be educated? Who decides a person who knows nothing but has a degree is more educated than a very wise person who's saintly, who spent his life or her life reading books but doesn't have a formal degree. This person is referred to as educated because he or she has received formal education, and this person would be uneducated because doesn't have a formal education. So all these artifacts that are modern and colonial, and the world is being looked at from a very European perspective.
But this kind of perspective that today people are seeing, we can say that this is out of their ignorance. But can we just overlook all the benefits that the West brought to the East? At the end of the day, there has been a lot of development that they brought, right? This whole idea of systemizing things, that's a good thing, right? Is there not a certain amount of negativity already in place that is pushing you to see the Western world in this light, and therefore you're saying these have negative connotations?
So I think one way to see this is that every civilization, including Western civilization, it produces tools and technology, right? There's no civilization that hasn't produced something that they use to advance their goals, okay? And tools are value neutral. You can use them for the right things, you can use them for the wrong things. And these tools are a human effort to make their lives better. So like Western civilization, again, this is also needs to be discussed, that Western civilization actually carried from where the Muslim civilization left behind the technology. So Muslims had a huge share in advancing global human technology and tools and all the things that are needed. And then the modern West came, based on their worldview, they focused on certain aspects, they did not, so they advanced tools. So it's an human effort where you go and have more sophisticated tools. But that's not what matters in a civilization. What matters is that where these tools are used and for what purpose they are channelized. So what the modern West has done is, and it's very interesting, that they have unified technology with tyranny and oppression. So basically they advanced the technology, but they built the global structures in a way that these structures in their very foundation are oppressive, in the sense that all other societies will always be behind in technology. Not only that, if someone wants to develop technology, they will go after that country and make sure they wreck that country and destroy it. So many examples. I mean, for example, there was, this is recent history, there was an Egyptian aeroplane carrying Egyptian nuclear scientists. All of them together, Israel shot it down, killed them all. Iraq was trying to build a nuclear reactor, Israelis attacked, they destroyed the nuclear reactor. Why is there so much issue on the nuclear issue in Iran? Someone can just tell Iran, right, like it's not a big deal, like just let it go. No, there are deeper connotations. It's a question of who is allowed to have the elite technology. So growth of technology is natural. Human beings will always do it. And we should see it from an Islamic perspective that it's a God-given gift. We have that creativity in us that God has given us that grows. Muslims were leading makers of technology. Then the modern West took it, so that's a negative on our part. Muslims should have led development of technology. That's what Iran is trying to do. But the problem is that, as I said, technology is embedded with tyranny in the sense that they won't let you get elite technology. And basically that dominance and imperialism has to be preserved. Same thing, like for example,
it's that concept of istikbar, that these powers are using their technology to go and dominate others and not allowing others to also flourish.
So technology is a tool. It's amazing. And any technology, if it's like a public technology, everyone will benefit. So there's no harm in saying that there were some technologies that people benefited from. But as Said mentioned, the overall system is designed in a way that you always remain a slave. You always remain dependent on them in not only one aspect. It's what, again, you have to project it to the current context. They want absolute surrender. Right? You've seen the word said, that's what been Trump. So if you don't surrender to them economically, militarily, politically, in terms of your culture, in terms of your ideas, in terms of your identity, it's not good enough. You're not good enough a slave or a secondary kind of a follower of their civilization. So it goes deeper into these kind of things.
I think to justify this negativity towards this Western dominance, I think it would be good to have a bit of a concrete example. Can you provide like an example of one of these countries and what have they lost because of colonization. So you mentioned earlier that it's not about what they've gained, it's also about how much they've lost. So do you have a concrete example that can show that, look, we have gained a bit, but what we've lost is much more?
So even theoretically, what Sheikh said, I'm going to quote something here. There's this very important book, it's called Dialectic of Enlightenment. Adorno and Horkheimer are the writers. So the first essay of that book, and what is enlightenment? What they say is, just to build on and sort of buttress what Sheikh said, they argue that this enlightenment project, modernity, in essence, they say it is totalitarian, it is authoritarian. It cannot accept anything, any duality. Everything has to be uniform and singular, and it itself is at high summit of humanity, and everything else will have to conform. If it is a political system, it'll have to be democracy. If you're not democracy, I'll bomb you to democracy. Economic system,
I'll bomb you to democracy.
Yes,
I think we should coin that line.
Yeah. Although they wanted to bomb to Stone Age. I don't know what that's.
They will bomb you to democracy. Economic system, there'll have to be one economic system. Everyone will have to be the SWIFT system, one international financial system. Culturally, you'll have to. Even as we sit on this
human rights, freedom, everything.
One idea of human rights. I define what a human is, and then I'll define the rights. Even your views on gender, I'll define them. I'll say what is taboo, what you can say, what you can't say. Anyone who slightly aberrates from this will be cancelled or will be sidelined. Even as we sit on this podcast, we know we have to self-censor. There are things we can't say.
Yeah. It's to be deleted. See, to be careful.
So even when it projects freedom, it is essentially highly authoritarian and very dictatorial. And it's not what I'm saying. I referred to Adorno and Horkheimer for this. So now this was theoretical. Now coming to the practical examples. As I mentioned, you look at Palestine. Palestine today, it is, I said, one of the finest examples of what colonialism does. A people living in the land, the British and the French come and they divide this whole territory. The French, they take Lebanon and Syria, parts of Syria. The British, they take Jordan and Iraq, and the French also took a part of Turkey. And then this area referred to Palestine, which is now occupied by the Zionists. This was the British, under the British mandate. And they literally sell it as a token of thanks to the Zionists who had supported them during the First World War. And eventually it is institutionalized in 1948, and then you have Nakba. So indigenous people, they are deprived of their right of existence. And this is why it's important to talk about this right now. Because had it not been for the British mandate, for the Britishers being in their Middle East and our West Asia actually, this would never have happened. This war in Iran would not be there.
Can we have another example? Because in the case of Israel and Palestine, the Israelis see it as their inherent right to the land. So this whole thing can come and the narrative will change, and it's possible that the narrative changes, and rather than looking at it from a colonialist perspective, they look at it from a religious perspective. Do you have another example?
Take Latin America, for example. The Spanish conquest of Latin America. I mean, where are the Mayans? Where are the Aztecs? They were empires, they were civilizations. People who were advanced, they had their own lives. And they put up a good fight, but they were happy, they were self-sufficient. But these marauders come, and during the 15th and 16th centuries,
they were happy. The ideas we have of those civilizations were people who didn't even have clothes. The Westerners brought the basic necessities as clothes.
So right. This is what we've been told about it.
Yeah. So I think a part of it is colonial projection of other people's history and how uncivilized they were, and we were on a civilizing mission. And some societies became civilized, some were not good enough by our standard, so we couldn't civilize them, so we just stole their resources and then we killed them. Yeah. So just to add to the thing, for example, Bolivia was colonized by Spain. This is 16th, 17th century. They say that in a period of 100 years, they stole so much silver from Bolivia and that region that it tripled Europe's silver reserves. Like the total amount of silver in Europe was tripled, and it led to death of 8 million people.
Which was 90% of the population in Latin America. 90% of the population in Latin America died as a result of Spanish conquest.
And that was...
probably 94%.
Yeah. So basically that was, as they say, was the first phase of colonialism where it was very violent, very overt. And probably at that time, they're not even thinking of going to deeper layers of changing culture, mindsets, and attitudes. That sophistication came later with the French and British colonialists. And although when we think about it, that sheer killing and brutalness is much more heavier for us as human beings. When you say so many people were killed, and that's true. But at times, worse is when they colonize the mind. They take away everything from you, your own. And for us as Muslims, that becomes much more important, because being colonized at times becomes equal to losing your religion. Basically, you'll have to lose your deen. You have to lose your ideals. You have to lose your faith. You have to lose your goals that you have getting closer to God. You have to become a secularized society. A secular Muslim who practices nothing, believes in nothing, has to be. And again, you have to also, I think colonialism was mainly, one of the main things was, it was an economic project. So just, you asked for a tangible example, I think the best example they gave is of India, as Syed even mentioned. So there's a book, again, this is well studied now. There's a economist, Indian economist by the name of Utsa Patnaik. She wrote a book in which she documented using colonial records how much money was stolen from India in 150 years of British Empire, their presence in India. And by today's, like, accounting for inflation and everything, she came to a figure of $45 trillion. This is basically money stolen, basically, not like anything they made profit through trade. No, that was different. Basically, this is literally, they designed a system of taxation and sucking out money from Indian economic system and Indian financial system. A very elaborate one, very interesting, although interesting, there's very evil, basically. It's a very evil system. $45 trillion, that's 15 times UK's GDP today. So if they sell UK 15 times, they'll be able to repay back India. So that's a huge damage to India. Its GDP, global GDP, reduced from being 1/4 of the world. It was the technologically most advanced nation by those standards. And it was reduced to one of the poorest nations on earth in 1947 when India became free. It had nothing. Like, you see so many famines. I mean, again, another thing, like, what did we lose, like, in India? So again, there's another book, again, written by an American author. It's called The Late Victorian Holocausts, okay, written in 1970. Basically, again, he goes to colonial records and he documents that British food policy in India and China and Brazil, it led to wide-scale famines. So you have a drought, you have a famine. And it's not like when you have a drought, you have a famine and people die. Why? Because you can change food supply and make sure that people get food. So that's what happened. So in one such incident, 1870s, there was a drought in Bengal, which is East India. And there was a lot of food in West India, which is Punjab, which is very fertile land. And it's common sense for any administrator that, so you're sitting in Delhi here. On your right, you have Punjab, where there's a lot of food. On your left, you have people who, there's no food, there's drought. Common sense is that you direct food from here to there. How do you do that? You ban exports. That's what most countries do. Then have drought, and they internally need. But the Governor General of India at that time, appointed by the British establishment, he said that I don't interfere with free markets, capitalism. So we don't go against Adam Smith and his theory, although that was just an excuse. They kept the exports open. 300,000 tons of food was exported from India in 10 years of drought. 8 million people died in Bengal.
So you have the local food.
Even the Bengal famine of Second World War.
Second World War. Churchill.
Yeah.
So basically you have the food produced locally that's being sent out when local people actually
not
need
necessarily
it.
sent out as well. That's why I mentioned it. Sometimes they exported it. Sometimes they went against the free market as well, because during the Bengal famine of 1942, the food stored was for the British Reserve forces.
In case
it was not
the
required.
British
They might have
soldiers
required
may
it.
need it during the war. So again, that idea of white supremacy, the white lives are more important. You store food for them, even if it means that for each British soldier saved, 1,000 are killed. And you see, again, we are saying this is history, but you can project it into right. And that's how they think, right? Israelis think that for each Israeli killed, we can kill, the ratio they look is like anything between 100 to 1,000. Very clearly they say it, like we are okay to kill 1,000 Palestinians in exchange for, and that's, unfortunately, these are human beings, but unfortunately it's come down to look at statistics, right? Like for 1,000 Israelis were killed on 7th October, they've killed 70,000. So that's the mindset. And even if you see, that's how even American politics works, right? So, and that's why number of American soldiers killed is a big deal. Yeah. That's why they always try to minimize their casualties and boast about it. Why? Because, again, that's a white supremacist mindset that our lives, the ratio is like 1:1,000.
White lives matter.
Yeah, white lives matter.
Said, you mentioned earlier that the Arabs, the Muslim Arabs, came and conquered Iran. Can we not throw it back at you and say, you also, as a Muslim, Islam also has a colonialist mindset? Islam came and colonized Iran. You have the Javid Shah people who are maybe watching this, very unlikely, but they're watching this and they're saying that, okay, you did that to us. We have a history. The Persians have been existing way before Islam ever came. The civilization was there, and then you came and you conquered our land, but you also conquered our minds. We were not Muslims before. You made us Muslims by force, apparently, right? How would you explain that?
See, this is why I brought up Iran earlier as well. So this is something that one can preempt, a question such as this. So first of all, I said this earlier as well, that in fact, let's begin with this. I'm not trying to present an apology for Muslim conquerors. We don't have to. Yeah. We believe that the rightful heirs of Prophet's legacy were not given the right and their due right. And the right to rule in Islam was usurped right at the inception. So that's something different. But even after that, despite saying that, I still say there's a stark difference between empires in the past and empires in present. And I present Iran as a case example because Iran has influenced Iran. It has influenced Islam. It has, in fact, at times contributed more to Islam than Arabs have. Yes, people have changed faith. Yes, people have changed their religion. But one, not all of it was through violence. And secondly, yes, when people lose wars, they're influenced. But Muslims necessarily didn't always convert people by force. It didn't happen in East Asia. It didn't happen in India. Otherwise, you wouldn't have this huge Hindu population in India. In Iran, for example, people of Iran, when they embraced Islam, it could have happened like other places. The local people, they could have remained on their own faith, but did not happen. So people embraced Islam. That's one. Secondly, you see the difference between modern colonization and the Muslim conquest of Iran in the sense that Iranians who were supposedly colonized in this case were not really colonized. They became the influencers and the heralders and the champions of this new faith and contributed more to it than those who had initially come up with this message. So there's no racial dichotomy. There may be racial differences in the sense that one person might think they are right and they're superior or inferior. That is something different in individuals or in cultures. But to systematize that and translate that into power structures and then make that a systematic claim to represent the faith, that did not happen. Because Persian Sunnis, now it may become like that because it's because of sectarian differences right now. But initially, Muslim Sunnis of Iran, they contributed more to the Islamic cause than Arabs themselves. So there was no settler-colonial relationship. There was no racial thing. There was no extraction, an extractive economic system. And there is no re-education in the sense that we'll make you Arabs in our image. Because these people, look at Persian poetry. Has it been Arabized? Not really. Persian poetry is one of the most beautiful experience of the relationship between Islam and traditional Persian art. It's architecture, Persian architecture, and religious works as well. So it's very different. That's why I keep insisting on this. We don't have to present apologies for Muslim conquerors. You don't have to present apologies for past blunderers and kings, but you have to be very nuanced in your understanding of the difference between modern slavery, modern colonization, and pre-modern wars and pre-modern conquest and empires.
Just to add to that,
the Prophet says, "Al-Islam ya'lu wa la yu'la alayh." Isn't that a colonialist way of looking at it?
So just to add to that before we go, one other difference that they mention is that in a colonial setting, you have a base, the country that's colonizing, and you have the colonized region. And this relationship stays till the end with the aim of exploiting the colony for the benefit of that nation that's colonizing. So basically, colonization is in fact, when it came, it was a very weird and a new thing. The world hadn't seen something like this before. What the world had seen was that the conquerors would go, plunder, come back. That's one. Or they would say the conquerors would go, they will settle there, assimilate, and
benefit the whole population.
So basically, whatever they would do, it would be in that region. It's not like, for example, when the Mongols attacked the Muslim regions, or for example, the Mughals went to India. It's not that they were exploiting money from India and sending it to Persia. No, they went there and they became Indians, basically. So they became Indian rulers ruling India for India in whatever right or wrong way. Again, we don't need to justify the details that, are these rulers just or not. We know they were not. They were not like divinely appointed leaders. But when the British came to India, it wasn't the case that these British rulers, they came and settled in India and they said, we don't care about Britain, we're ruling India. No, it wasn't like that. Basically, they're saying that we are exploiting India for the benefit of Britain. And again, even Britain, we have to be careful. It's not like public in Britain. For the British elite, means those business people, the East India Company, they benefit more. And of course, the British society gets a trickle-down effect of that. So I think it's a different way of doing things where it's exploitation of a place for another region, as opposed to the other places. So that's one, I think. As far as this thing is concerned, al-Islamu ya'lu wa la yu'la alayh. So I think probably one way to look at it is like this, that as Said mentioned, that when Islam takes precedence, or even you can use the word dominance over a certain society, it makes sure that it's done in a certain way. So the first thing is that it maintains justice, in the sense that it doesn't say that those who came and taught you Islam will always be higher. So it was never the case that Arabs, because Arabs brought Islam to Persia, they are the higher. Yes, these attitudes must have persisted there. There might be some Arabs that time that thought like that we are better than that.
But that's not what Islam brought as a religion.
And not only in theory, in practice, the Persians who became new Muslims, they rose to prominence in every single field. Military, politics, poetry, art. Basically, they outnumbered and outpowered the Arabs by a huge margin, even in the Sunni world. Yeah. Why did that happen? Because Islam's model, again, I don't like the word dominance, Islam's model of expanding to other societies is different. So one is justice. The other factor is that it puts a lot of emphasis on others embracing it, not shoving down their throat. That's the second difference. The third difference is that it's not adverse to the local cultures and variations. It would not go to Persia and destroy everything that's Persian and insist that you have to speak Arabic. You have to think in Arab way. As opposed to the Western civilization, it doesn't have any of these. So firstly, it's extremely unjust. So there's always hierarchy. There are white masters and you are under them. And they will say it to you. Again, projected to current context. The beauty of what's happening today is that what's not supposed to be said, Trump says it. But that's how always it's been. That was the reality of the Western domination. So there is no justice. Secondly, the Western model, we call it colonialism, is very attacking. It will show down their ideology through your throat. It's very forceful. It won't give you an option to embrace it. Yes, there might be people around the world who thought about the Western worldview and they embraced it. That's fine. That's their thing. But many nations, these Western ideas were imposed on them. It's like you will bomb them to democracy. So you can see that this is how, like when Islam will do it, and Islam will take precedence, it will do it differently. it's a more natural way. Sorry, the third thing, which
is it doesn't allow that variety. It pushes everybody to follow that same model.
So basically, if it comes to India, it will heavily attack the Indian local thing. And that's what it did. For example, when the British colonial machinery came, India's language of culture, knowledge, everything was Persian. For whatever reason, historical reasons, art, poetry, bureaucracy, everything was Persian. They systematically dismantled it, to the extent that today no one knows that Persian existed in India as a language even. So what it does, it doesn't tolerate local variations. It's very anti-local culture. So it will attack African culture. And Muslims, unfortunately, suffered the most because they had a very elaborate, fine culture, art, everything. All of that was attacked, and they said, you be like us in all these things. So it's very, in other words, it's very intrusive.
When we look at clothing, you see Western clothing all around the world. You see language, again, the same languages, even the food, right? All these chains.
The three of us right now, we come from different places, we're talking English, our audience as well. So there's something else I wanted to add here. And this goes back to the question that you asked previously about, the colonizers, they did good as well. What about that? See, let's just imagine for a while that the Arabs, they had been the same as the modern colonizers. What would have happened to Iran?
Yeah.
See? And this happened elsewhere as well. So now just imagine, had the modern colonizers not been who they were, how would India be?
Yeah. Imagine how
would Africa be? How would Latin America be? That is all that we've lost. That erasure of history, that erasure of any potential of a different form of life. That is very important.
I guess
even that question has been nullified, that a different life could have been possible.
I think
and that might have been better than the modern life.
This question needs a bit of elaboration, but we won't do that right now because our time is limited. But I think for most people whose idea of the past is that the people in the past before colonization were very primitive, going around naked everywhere and stuff like that, because that's the idea that most people have. I think this question won't have a good answer. You'll need to elaborate on it. And I think what you've already talked about, I think if those who've been listening paid attention, then I think the answer is within what we've talked about so far. That there were civilizations, there was a lot of progress.
As I said, modernity is totalitarian. It is authoritarian. Yeah. What does backward or developed mean? If you and you're traveling, let's say, to Mashhad, and I'm going to Isfahan, who is ahead and who is far behind? No one is ahead, no one is far behind. We're going in two different directions. Yeah. This idea of backwardness, of being developed and developed, it only comes into existence when you believe there's only one path. And the colonizers, they've convinced the world. They've made everyone believe there's just one path. It's not Sirat al-Mustaqim, it's Sirat al-Modernity. And you have to be on this path. Some people, and all of us, we very casually talk about this. Oh, we are 100 people. This section of the world is 100 years behind. This is 200 years behind. This is 50 years ahead. Why? Because we are implicitly, we've all embraced the fact there's only one path, only one destiny, and everyone has to be qahran on this path,
everyone
and you have no other choice.
To the American dream, basically. Yeah. We all should be like that. That's the model that's being presented.
What's interesting?
No other dream is possible.
Yeah.
You're lagging behind, or you are ahead on the same path, but there's just one path, one way of life. Everyone will have to embrace this linear version of history.
Can I summarize all of this by saying that the big difference between Islam as an idea where Islam also wants to spread out, yes, right? And the idea of colonialism is that colonialism is for the benefit of another people, so they go to a place but to get benefit from it, whereas Islam, if it comes to a place, is to benefit the people of that place, right? And that's where the stark difference is.
And even just as we're discussing, add to that, even it's also about how Islam does it. Even the method is different. Method is very soft. Islam wants people to understand and embrace, and the one amazing thing about Islam is that it can accommodate for immense amount of diversity. And just one example is just to give poetry. Islam created poetry unlike any other civilization with 3 different flavors, each very sweet in its own way, in Arab, Persian and Urdu culture. And when you look at this poetry, those who know all these 3 languages say it's amazing that Islam has this ability to incorporate this human diversity. So if in some way, And we know this because it's the divine version. It's sent by God. So it's truly universal without being intrusive and imposing and without erasing.
And without being relative.
Yeah.
So
it's absolute, but it's
universal.
Flexible, yeah.
Universal, but rooted in objective reality. But in this case, that objective reality, in terms of modern colonization, it is the white man and his understanding of his own superiority becomes the measure. Yeah. It's not objective reality.
Basically, Islam comes with a system of value and beliefs that are based on reason and divine teachings, and it goes and gives it out to the people, a framework where the people can continue to practice their own culture and their own way of life within this framework. And that's why you find this diversity. You have Islam in Malaysia, but that doesn't stop them from eating their food, speaking their language, wearing the clothes.
It's like an umbrella.
And you see that diversity. Pakistan as an Islamic country, Malaysia, and then you have, for example, Iran and the Arab countries. They all have their own lifestyles, but they're all within a framework, a general framework that is based on reason and Islamic teachings. Whereas if you look at the remnants of colonialism, you'll see it's all shirt, trousers, tie, very, very uniform. Where
same language,
same language, and the same way and lifestyle is imposed everywhere. So that's where the stark difference would be. I think let's fast forward and come and speak about directly how is this now colonialist mindset affecting the world today, but specifically because we're talking about the battle of narratives in the context of the war we're going through right now. How is that affecting what we're going through today?